Casual Magic has been brought to you by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can get cool stuff. Use the code CASUAL for 5% off your order. We're also sponsored by Quiver Time, makers of the Quiver and Bolt deck cases and other fine card-holding accessories. Use the code CASUAL on their site for 10% off your purchase. And by Architect, a deck hosting website that doesn't sell anything, but they like me and I like them, so kindly use them for all your deck list needs. Now, on to the show. Hello and welcome to Casual Magic, the show where we talk about the fun side of Magic the Gathering. My name is Shivam, Bhatt, and Casual Magic is brought to you by Cool Stuff Inc., Quiver Time, and Architect. Today, we are now into season 4 of this show, which is insane to me that I've been doing this for so long. And I'm grateful to all of you who have come along for the ride. I have a Patreon that you guys should come and check out and help me do more of these and expand it and build it better and, I don't know, find new editors and things. But in the meantime, I thought I wanted to start a new project with this year of Casual Magic, which is one of the things I've noticed the audience likes and that I really enjoy is going through like deck archetypes and deck techs and talking to people about how to build cool and fun and interesting kind of things to do in Commander. And plus, we just like talking about piles of cards. I think like there's something about Magic players just enjoy listening to other people read like. It's a weird side tangent. I'll introduce my guest in just a second. A weird side tangent. I was talking to Ben Wheeler when we were recording Shivam and Wheeler Love Magic. And he was like, you know, people are literally just listening to us grab a stack of cards and talk to each other and say, man, do you know how cool this card is? And I was like, yes, they are. That's exactly what we're here for. But I decided to invite one of my dear friends, my fellow CAG mate, and soon to be author of his own Commander book, Tim Willoughby, to come and join me to talk about one of my all-time favorite topics in Magic, zombies. I haven't yet decided if this show is going to be called The Joy of Zombies or Zombo Combo, but you guys probably already know because you've seen it. Hi, Tim. Thank you so much for joining me and taking the time.
Thanks for the invite. This is probably the easiest topic for me to start talking about in almost the whole of Magic. Like, as it turns out, there's quite a lot of it. So whether or not we get to cover everything, I'm not sure. But like, yeah, there's loads to cover when it comes to zombies. Like, obviously, there are loads of different creature type decks, but this is the one that gets me cooking.
Like, I'm not going to lie. If you guys caught my last interview with Tim, you know that the reason I play Commander today is one of the main reasons I play is that I cracked a Grimgrin at my first pre-release in Innistrad when I came back to Magic. And I later on the mothership saw an article on how to turn Grimgrin into a cool format deck that I'd never heard of before called Commander, where you can play 100 cards and Soul Ring. And I was like, oh my God, I'm sold. And all those cards I had in my pre-release kit, like, you know, Rooftop Storm and Gravecrawler and whatever. And I'm like, yeah, let's go. And basically Tim's deck basically became the genesis of my current favorite deck, which is my Grimgrin deck, which you could have seen on Professor's Shuffle Up and Play, which just crossed 1 million views, which
insane.
I've never had anything in my life be seen by 1 million people. That's a number that doesn't sound real to me.
There are some countries that have less than 1 million people. Not many. Like, it would be a very small country, but
yeah,
like
sure.
A very small country might have all watched you play Commander, which is pretty rad.
How weird is that? But I love zombies. I really do. I mean, everybody knows me as like the soldier guy in my Tajik deck, but that's because that's like my fun pet deck. But really, the deck I enjoy the most is zombies. It is like Rooftop Storm, Gravecrawler combos, and Crazy Time. And I was like, and Tim came to me and he was like, hey, you want to do a show about zombie decks? And I'm like, is there more than just the one? And it turns out that our boy here has like 35 million different zombie decks. So I'm really, I mean, like one for every friggin' archetype color. And so why don't we start at the top, Tim? Give me a general idea of what you like, the holistic notion of zombies.
What is zombies all about? Okay, so zombies have been in more or less every single set for the whole of Magic. So even in Alpha, Scathe Zombies and Zombie Master, who is now a zombie. Actually, this is good that we cover this early because it's going to get weird later if we don't. The great creature type update has happened at various points in Magic where cards that start out being not zombies have now turned into zombies. through some weird necromancy, I guess. So, like, Zombie Master is now a zombie, whereas at the genesis of Magic, he was a lord. Scathed zombies were originally the only zombies around, but essentially, zombies do tons and tons of different things. Arguably, they cover more ground than almost any other archetype. So, something graveyard is probably the most flavorful thematic starting point for zombies, but they swarm, so you get your sort of tokens and lords things going on. Around Innistrad sort of time, they really started leaning into mill, either self-mill or milling the opponent.
Yeah.
There are zombie control decks, there are lots of zombie combo decks, but then, like, the thing that kind of brings it all back is they have this kind of, like, fairly slow sense of inevitability. Like, they take lots of meandering paths to get there, but if the game goes long enough, zombies are probably in pretty good shape because they're quite robust.
Yes.
And then, as we'll start to cover over the next however long it might be, like, because they can do so many different things, they have a little air of unpredictability to them that is kind of one of the bits that gets my deck builder's itch going. Like, you can have, especially in Commander, where so much of what you're doing is kind of dictated by your general, or can be dictated by your general. If you're playing a zombie deck, people don't really know on turn one whether or not you're a combo deck, a control deck, an aggro deck, a stacks deck, a mill deck, a group hug deck, Voltron. Like, you can more or less do any of the major archetypes of what might happen with Commander just within the zombie tribe.
Yeah, like, for instance, the Grimgrin deck that I have can either function as a Voltron deck where Grimmy is just insanely large and hits you for a lot, or it can be a combo deck with Gravecrawler just going to the yard and, you know, doing a bunch of negatory things. Or you're exactly right. It could be even a control deck with the pet card that you introduced me to, Stronghold Assassin, that just lets you sack a creature and destroy target non-black creature, which, incidentally, with the latest Great Creature update, is now a Phyrexian zombie assassin.
Yeah, we've gone back to the stage where there's no longer a printing of Stronghold Assassin that fully encapsulates all of its creature types. For a while, we had it fixed, and now it's broken again.
Yeah, which I use, as you recommended, I use the Commander 2013 version, which says Zombie Assassin, just so that I don't get it confused in my when I'm trying to figure out the math for all the lords I have going on. One of the things that really does annoy me, just as an aside, is that someone in their Magic decided that like, they've never been consistent on how lords work. It's like all other zombies get +1/+1, or this card and all zombies get +1/+1, or, you know, everything else. And this creature is not a zombie or is a zombie. I think the big, like, problem for me was Lord of the Undead, which was originally like other zombies get like +1/+1, and the original Planeshift version was a lord. All zombies get +1/+1 is what the original one said. And then Lord of the Undead wasn't a zombie. Then they later made it into a zombie and then said other zombies get +1/+1. Like,
so the reason for that, I think, and I'm not going to read the minds of anyone in Renton. That's a long way to project those brainwaves. But, like, I believe that the reason for that is to make it easier to count. So, like, let's imagine you had a creature that said all creatures get +1/+1, and it's a 1/1. Like, actually, it's a 2/2, but it looks like a 1/1 at that point.
Yeah.
So I think that's the reason they word it that way. But I do get your point. And actually, Zombies has among the most lords of any creature type. So
it's funny because, like, I remember one day Gavin Verhey came to my house and we were hanging out, and I was just like, help me tinker with some decks or whatever. And we played against each other. And he looked at my zombie deck. He's like, I see you took every zombie lord there is and put it all into a pile. And I'm like, yes.
I mean, arguably at this stage, not even, because there's so many. Depending on,
like, more zombie lords in their slots, which is wild.
It depends on your definition of a lord, I guess. And this is something that's worth thinking about, because one of the good gateway zombie decks that you can build is a whole lot of lords and Bob's your mother's brother. You're pretty much there at that point. So your classic lord, for, like, if we were looking at Merfolk, Lord of Atlantis, and most of your other lords, they all give a power and or toughness boost, right?
Right.
The original Zombie Lord, which is
Zombie Master.
Zombie Master, he gives regeneration and swamp walk to all of your zombies. He doesn't impact their power and toughness at all. So, like, when I said zombies have the most lords, they have both, by my count, 7.5, 8, like, true lords that pump power and toughness. And then they have a bunch of slightly looser things that pump power. So, like, something like Leelan's Mastery isn't a creature, but it does pump all zombies.
Right.
Or Obelisk of Erd does pump all zombies, but isn't even specific to zombies. So,
right.
Bad Moon, like there's tons of them.
Bad Moon, man, I should run that. It's been a minute.
Bad Moon is all black creatures, and not just yours, your opponents as well.
That's why I don't run.
It's still worth doing. But then you have stuff like your Zombie Master that gives all of your zombies a different set of abilities. And once you start looking at, like, I guess I'm going to call them force multipliers rather than lords, just because to my mind, lords always make stuff bigger. But like when you start looking at force multipliers, you can easily go, essentially my entire deck is going to be things that pump the team. And weirdly, when you start thinking about it in those terms, rather than it sounding like a mono-black deck, it sounds like a green-white deck. It sounds like a deck that goes, I'm going to make lots of friends, and all my friends are going to help their other friends. It's just that it's in this instance, all of your friends are dead now, and they're going to kill people. Yeah, like when you start looking at all the different things you can do with zombies, I think a really good place to start is to look at those lords or force multipliers and go, what can I do? What do they enable me to do in game? And it's not just about attacking. Like there's quite a lot of board control. There's quite a lot of other elements that you can get just from these guys that improve your entire team. So I'm going to just, if I look away from camera at any given point, it's because there's a lot of moving parts going on with
these. I
want to make sure I get my card names all good. So, like some really straightforward ones, things like Vengeful Dead. Whenever another zombie you control dies, each opponent loses a life.
Yes.
Oh my goodness, words. Noxious Ghoul. Whenever a zombie comes into play, all non-zombie creatures get -1/-1 until the end of turn. These are not lords in the traditional sense, but they definitely like pile up and do cool things. And essentially, I'm going to cover off a few like little bits and pieces of tips for building a zombie deck. Like if you go on Scryfall or Gatherer or any search engine you choose to use for cards, if you type zombie and then the word whenever, like triggered abilities is a whole separate set of lords that is very, very potent for zombies, that you can do super cool things with that have potentially, they're not necessarily trying to achieve the same things that a normal lord would. They're a little bit more dynamic, but they mean that if your mono black zombie plan was, I'm going to make a lot of zombies, gradually make them bigger, but then also start having some of these triggers in play, you could stop there and you would have a very, very serviceable deck that will do. Actually,
why don't we start there? Why don't we start with mono black? Because that seems like the most straightforward kind of a zombie. Like if I'm going to just build a straight zombies deck, mono black seems to be the place to be, because that's like you get the best of all of the zombies and you're not diluting your colors. So you kind of got like everything you're looking for here.
Yes. And there are some zombies that I think fit in just about any zombie deck you choose to build, assuming that you're starting with black. And I would recommend that black is your starting point for any zombie deck. It's tricky. It's not impossible to build a non-black zombie deck, but black is kind of the spiritual home of zombies.
A little memey if you're trying to do that.
Yeah. I mean, like, live your truth. But yeah, for this one, like, I would say that I have a few, like, don't leave home without zombies that end up in almost any zombie deck I build because they're so versatile and powerful. Right. So you've already mentioned him. Gravecrawler does basically everything that you were looking for a zombie to ever do apart from block. So it's an efficient size creature that can attack every turn, and it can attack every turn without a huge amount of fear.
For the audio listeners at home, Gravecrawler is a 1 black mana zombie 2/1 that says Gravecrawler can't block, and you may cast Gravecrawler from your graveyard as long as you control a zombie.
Yeah, so if you don't have any zombies in play or the opportunity to get any zombies in play, I'm going to go and throw it out there that you're not really a zombie deck anymore. And at that point, Gravecrawler gets a little bit dicier. But assuming that you have even quite a small number of zombies, to be honest, like you can have a fairly compact package of them if you want to, Gravecrawler does loads of things. Being able to come back from the graveyard means that you've got a little bit of resiliency against board wipes. We're starting with the straightforward, easy ones here. There's quite a lot of areas where being able to maintain critical mass in the spite of other people doing things is important for zombies. That's their inevitability, right? And Gravecrawler, it's like they're going to have to remove it from a graveyard or exile it if they want to get rid of it, because otherwise it will just be in play for essentially the entire game. And while the 2 damage doesn't sound like a lot, if you've got lords, if you've got ways of pumping it, or especially as we'll get onto a second, ways of exploiting it, either dying or coming into play lots of times, that can be a whole game plan.
Gravecrawler is one of those cards which at first doesn't look very it doesn't look very fancy or anything. It's just a very simple card. It's a zombie, it doesn't block, and it comes back from the graveyard. But when you look deeper into it, it enables literally every strategy that you can imagine a zombie deck wanting to do, just by virtue of the fact that it can come back for free, basically, or like minimal costs.
Yes. So if we're building a zombie combo deck, just with Gravecrawler alone, Gravecrawler plus Sack Outlet, you're hauntingly close, no pun intended, to already having a combo right there.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got Phyrexian Altar and Gravecrawler, you sack the Gravecrawler for a 1 black mana, you recast the Gravecrawler, now you've got the loop to do whatever you want to do.
Yes. There's, like, honestly, even if you don't have an infinite combo with Gravecrawler, and they're fairly easy to get to, and we'll cover off lots of them, don't you worry. Even if you don't have an infinite combo with them, even if you just said that you had... so Carrion Feeder is a good zombie that lets you sacrifice. So it's 1 mana for a 1/1 that, again, can't block. You can sacrifice a creature to put a +1/+1 counter on Carrion Feeder.
Classic.
So in principle, you can Voltron him up if you sacrifice lots of zombies. But to be honest, he is a sacrifice outlet a large amount of the time, simply so that you can get some of these weird loops going. Even if you just say, now I can trigger my Noxious Ghoul as many times as I have black mana every single turn, because I'm sacrificing a Gravecrawler, I'm recasting it from the graveyard, I'm sacrificing it, I'm recasting it. Every time a zombie comes in, all non-zombies are getting -1/-1. Now you've got a board control engine. If you've got a... we've already mentioned it, so we might as well cover him off again. So a Vengeful Dead. Each time a zombie dies, each opponent loses a life. Now you're saying, I can pay a black, I can sack my Gravecrawler, I can pay a black, bring him back, and every time it's dying, my opponents are losing a life. So one of the classic issues that a normal deck that's just going, the Selesnya decks, if you will, I'm going to go very wide, I'm going to make my guys gradually get bigger. If for whatever reason attacking is not feasible, for example, if you're in a pseudo mirror where everyone's doing roughly that, you need to have a B plan, and zombies have so many plans that they can just they can work their way around things very neatly. So yeah, I would never leave home without Gravecrawler for essentially any zombie deck. Sacrifice outlets work phenomenally with him. But yeah, anything that's triggering off anything, Gravecrawler is the secret lord that just makes them all better.
It is the fundamental pillar around which zombies dances, I'll be honest. It's like the load-bearing pillar for this deck.
Yeah, and like, arguably I'd say it hits a point where you almost need to go, it's well enough known that it's a pillar of zombies that you almost had to plan around when someone deals with it.
Oh yeah.
Because if someone has a timely piece of graveyard removal or exile effect that can catch it without a sacrifice outlet, you don't want your deck to be the full one-trick pony. And there's no real reason that it should be. So it's just a matter of you've got it in your arsenal, you know it's there, it's reliable, it's faithful. Now we can figure out the other 99 cards. So others that I like that maybe not quite as obviously sort of dead center in terms of what you're going with, but are just very consistently powerful. Crypt Breaker, another 1-mana 1/1. You'll notice you get to go super low to the ground with zombies if you want to. You can start on turn 1, actually putting threats on the board that are achieving things.
Crypt
1-mana
Breaker,
1/1.
Yeah, go ahead.
You can pay 1 on a black and just tap it and discard a card to make a 2/2 zombie token. You can also tap 3 untapped zombies to draw a card and lose a life. So this is a card advantage engine, for those moments where attacking suddenly doesn't look like it's going to work so well for you.
The card is so like I had that as I had the freaking Crypt Breaker in the Shadows over Innistrad or whatever set it came out in. It was my pre-release card, and I put it in the deck just ambiently. I was like, "Oh, this seems like it would be neat." It turns out this card is insane, and it's just you do so much damage. If you've seen that card in Ixalan right now, that you can tap an artifact, 2 artifacts or creatures, and do 1 damage, and it's just slow and steady. Crypt Breaker lets you tap these things as an instant. So if you're making zombies on their turn or whatever, you can still just tap them and do a damage ambiently. And that stuff adds up so quickly.
So card drawing, always going to be important. My third one that I just kind of include in everything because it's kind of almost a freebie is Undead Augur. Black for a 2/2. Whenever it or another zombie you control dies, you draw a card and lose a life. These 3 on their own, already you've got a whole bunch of card drawing, you've got token generation, you're in really good shape. Just if you're curving out with zombies, you're also drawing cards, you're also doing all of these other things.
I will say this, Undead Augur is not a May.
Correct.
It is a force draw, and I have definitely accidentally killed myself trying to draw a million cards.
Yeah, if you hitting a point where you're like, oh, I can go infinite now, infinite is a lot of life to lose.
Yeah, make sure that the Augur is the first one to go in the bin.
Yeah, like you have sacrifice outlets, chances are there will be a point in time where sacrificing Undead Augur is a good idea. But in the meantime, Undead Augur will do some good work for you in terms of drawing cards. None of these are the big, sexy centerpieces of the zombie deck that people are going to roll their eyes when they hit the battlefield and go, well, the game's over now. But these are the
like
ones
fundamental utility pieces.
Yes. So we spoke about inevitability. These are your inevitability. The one last one that it might be one of my most played cards in Commander because it just, all of the numbers just stack up for me, is Withered Wretch.
Mm-hmm.
Now this one, if you read it, it really doesn't look like it's doing a whole lot. Black for a 2/2. So efficient, but nothing exciting. And you can pay 1 mana, 1 generic mana to exile a card in a graveyard. It sounds like filler. This is arguably a much worse Scavenging Ooze.
Mm-hmm.
But it's got a few things going for it. So firstly, it is a zombie, which, if we're building a zombie deck, we will have lots of things that synergize with zombies. We can do some very cool things with zombies to really make the most of that creature type. It's got a threat of activation. So you can, whatever your mana situation, assuming you've got any lands untapped, anyone that wants to do anything with their graveyard has to worry about the fact that this is just sat there, potentially saying, oh, you want to cast your Animate Dead? I'm going to stop your Animate Dead for 1 mana on the board. You're going to have to wait till I'm tapped out or kill this thing. But then it's got, this is something, I can't remember who the person was that coined this phrase, but it has what I like to still refer to as keyword crappy, which is, it really
doesn't look like a threat.
It doesn't look like the kind of card that you want to have to use a removal spell on.
That sounds
even
like a
if
BDM
it's the thing that's
coinage,
stopping
by the
you.
way.
Say again, sorry?
That sounds like a BDM coinage for what it's worth.
It may be. It was from the era when there were 20 articles a day going up on Magic and I was reading all of them, so I don't want to miscredit, but...
That's fair.
Yeah, keyword crappy is cards that you don't want to use removal on, but that arguably at some point you probably should. And Withered Wretch has this.
Like, I put this into my Grim Grin deck after you told me about it later, and I looked at this card, and I'm like, this seems garbage compared to, like, the things that are actually in there. It doesn't have any flash or pizzazz to it. But it turns out the utility value of a colorless mana to eat somebody's card out of the graveyard is so huge, especially in Modern Commander, where the graveyard is just another holding pen for all your deck. Like, you can really just churn through it, and it's so cheap. And because it doesn't get bigger the way Ooze does, or the way like Lion Sash or whatever, it's like it just sits there and kind of chews on the graveyard. People kind of, there's always a bigger threat.
Yeah, and it's one that, like, something that Zombies does very well is basically treats its graveyard as a second hand. Like, it has so many different ways of getting back, especially creatures, but to some extent non-creatures as well, from the graveyard, that it as a deck is one that really wants to use its graveyard as effectively card drawing, card advantage. Lots and lots of decks have got the memo on this. Like, it's not unusual at all to find yourself up against decks that their whole game plan is to do things with their graveyard. And if you've got stuff that you get to go, it's already, like, if you draw it in a game when no one's doing anything with their graveyard, it's still a 2-mana 2/2 that is a zombie. And that means that you can cast a Gravecrawler from the graveyard while it's in play. That means that it will get bigger due to all of these lords. It will trigger the right things. It will get tapped to do damage and all of that lovely stuff. It's all there. You can do all of those things, and it gets to do so at a really low cost. So it's one that's, it's not exciting, but it's very impactful in a way that means that, yeah, I don't cut it. Also, at 2 mana, you can slip it down almost any turn of the game. If you draw it on turn 9, sometimes you cast it and then activate it 7 times because that's just what needs to happen. Or if you draw it on turn 2, sometimes you stick it in play and it just attacks for 2. But it does it all. I love it.
And if you happen to have, like, say, Tormod or something as, like, your commander, then while this guy is eating, you are getting a bunch of value for it. Because Tormod is like, you get a bat every time something leaves the graveyard. And so this dude can just chew on the yard, and you end up with a table.
Yeah, it's an interesting, like, truism of zombie decks that you have to be quite actively engaged while you're playing them, even if they seem quite sort of ponderous in terms of how they do things, that, like, everything works off everything else, which means that you build these Rube Goldberg machines almost by accident, and keeping track of everything that's going on, keeping track of the important cards in your graveyard, keeping track of the important cards in your opponent's graveyard, for example, is... Yeah, it's not automatic. You do have to be engaged. But honestly, if you're not engaged, then you're probably not enjoying Commander as much as you could be anyway. So I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing. It's just, it is a thing.
I think that's actually one of the things that drew me to the archetype, is that it feels very straightforward. I'm just putting a bunch of things out, turning them sideways and attacking you. But it's got so much, like, interesting play and depth to it that you just kind of don't see at the first glance. And I don't know, I think it's really grand.
Yes. So we're starting to think about, like, there are loads of... So, like, a card that I like, that I play in a lot of zombie decks, though maybe not all of them, is something like Fleshbag Marauder. 3 mana for... Sorry, 2 and a black for a zombie warrior, 3/1. When it comes into play, each player sacrifices a creature, including yourself. It's an ability that doesn't just exist on zombies, but here we have the zombie version of it, and... you very frequently will have creatures that you either actively want to die or certainly don't mind dying. Yes. And if you start going, I've got this Fleshbag Marauder, I'm going to cast it, everyone's going to have to sacrifice something. I'm going to sacrifice my Fleshbag Marauder, and then I have, an oversold cemetery, say, to return a creature from my graveyard to hand each turn. Or Gisa and Gerolf is my general, so I get to play a zombie from the graveyard every turn. Or, I've got a Volrath Stronghold, or there's so many different ways of getting zombies back that this is another, like, inevitable thing that if it works out that you're playing against, for example, a Voltron deck, often they have lots and lots of defense against targeted removal. Often it will work out that sort of even mass removal, they might have answers to. Like, indestructibility is more prevalent now than it ever has been. They may not have quite as much mileage when it comes to stopping sacrifice effects, non-targeted ones. And so it's another one that, like, it's not going to be, Dear Diary, today I drew my my Marauder, but Fleshbag Marauder, it's just quietly doing work. And if you're the sort of person that likes to throw around the word value, zombie decks from top to bottom, there's no reason for you to ever have a vanilla creature that's not a token that's come into play, because there's value through and through for the entire creature type. It's rad.
Okay, so that seems like a good kind of like. So basically, roughly speaking, in Black, we've got like two general ideas. You've got the fill your graveyard with value and recur it, or you've got the token swarm, which is my personal preference.
Mm-hmm.
And those seem to be the two kind of broadest archetypes for if you're doing straight mono black or black blue or just kind of defaulted zombie. And really, most zombie decks tend to have segments of both in them, but you can obviously lean further one direction or the other. For me, I personally, just because I like zombies, I like to put out a whole horde of shambling, ambling dudes over time and then just have that spin out.
Well, maybe we should cover a couple of the ways that you really can swarm, because so far we've talked about like individual cards that are great.
Sure.
But they're not a swarm, they're just, a gathering. A magical gathering, if you will.
They're a pod.
But there are ways of getting tons of zombies in play. So we spoke briefly about Crypt Breaker. It does make zombie tokens. It doesn't make them a particularly fast lick. There are various lords that help you make zombie tokens, either mono black or once you start getting into more colors. Like a really plain Jane one might be something like a Grave Titan. Not a zombie, but friend to zombies. 6 mana, 6/6, Death Touch. When it comes into play or whenever it attacks, make 2 zombie tokens.
I have grandfathered Grave Titan into like every deck I build. It's a zombie as far as I'm concerned in everything but name. I mean, it doesn't get all the bonuses, but man, you get so many zombies off that guy.
Yes. And then we've got things like Liliana's Mastery, which is kind of like a zombie lord that makes a couple of zombie tokens on the sly. Then we start having things that can go real crazy. So Army of the Damned is a big one. We're talking about a big spell here that makes 13 tapped zombie tokens and then has flashback to make 13 more tapped zombie tokens. Very big deal. Yes. Definitely a powerful card. Not one that I run loads, but maybe this is just everyone's got their own flavor of zombies they prefer the most.
It's one of my pet cards. Like, I understand that that's not the most efficient, and obviously by the time you get to 8 mana, you should probably be winning anyways. But you know what? 13 tapped zombies coming into play is still a really cool feeling.
So my favorite way of getting lots... So, all right, before I get to my favorite way, we'll cover a new one that I'm just starting playing about with a little bit now. Wand of Orcus. Have you played with this one much yet?
I've put that into the deck. It is hot.
So we're talking about an equipment now. So Voltron zombies, I guess, maybe. 2 and a black for an equipment with a equip cost of 3. Whenever the equipped creature attacks or blocks, it and zombies you control get Death Touch into the end of the turn.
That line is so insane by itself.
Yes. Even if that was all it did, in your dedicated zombie deck, it means that suddenly your whole... I'm not going to say you're winning combat, but you're definitely not losing combat. Lots of things are dying. But the really interesting bit is whenever the equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, create that many 2/2 zombie tokens. So if you do have your Grim Grins, your big carrion feeders, your Whiter Precinct 6 with 3 full graveyards around you, like you can have some really big zombies in play. And if you can swing unimpeded, either due to an empty board or due to a rogue's passage, let's say, you can make a full army in one fell swoop.
It's so gross.
There are other ways of making lots of zombies. They all have their strengths and weaknesses. So Tombstone Stairwell.
Yes.
It's an enchant world from Mirage, I think it was, that makes 3/1 zombies with haste equal to the number of creatures in a player's graveyard. It does it for everyone in their upkeep, and then those creatures get sacrificed at the end of turn. But if you're looking to get lots of zombies coming into play triggers, lots of zombies dying triggers, Tombstone Stairwell will do that. You just need to be ready for the fact that in all likelihood, everyone's going to be attacking you with lots of zombies if you do it. You've got Endless Ranks of the Dead. This is an enchantment for 4. I'm not huge on it. It's very, very slow. But basically it means that you get to, in your upkeep, create a zombie token for each zombie you control. Over time...
Well, you make it for like half the number of zombies you control.
Sorry, yes, I do apologize. Yeah, it will make a lot of zombies. In a game that spans to infinity, you'll get infinity...
Here's the thing, though. I will never, ever cut Endless Ranks of the Dead because A, it's got one of my favorite arts in all of Magic.
Agreed.
With the amazing stained glass and the zombies coming through. B, there is something just so incredibly fun about the inevitability of that Katamari of zombies just getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
It's terrifying. So, like, if we circle to sort of the idea of what the different horror monster tropes mean, like what they like, the secret Victorian meaning of different types of monsters. You've got like your werewolves that are about how scary it is to lose control to your own fury, or you've got vampires that are the same but for like lust, and then you've got zombies. And the thing that's scary about zombies is not a zombie; they're like the fear of time, right? It's inevitably, you can never escape death. At some point, it might come at you slowly, but it will get you. And that's kind of the zombie vibe that I get from Endless Ranks of the Dead. At some point, it will be a problem. And like, the rest of the table can see that.
Yeah. I also use Liliana the Last Hope's emblem, which is effectively the same thing. And this is a good time for me to actually show my secret tech for zombie decks. All of them really ought to be running Amulet of Vigor. Amulet of Vigor is whenever a permanent enters the battlefield tapped, you untap it. Because the fact that, like, one of the drawbacks of zombies is that they all come into play tapped. And they're like, oh, yeah, it's supposed to be slow zombies. I'm like, yeah, well, Amulet of Vigor means these guys are just getting their shot of Viagra. They're waking up. They're standing up and ready to come in. And it's super... Like, I remember the first time I had that in the deck, someone's like, why would you just put this in the deck? It doesn't do anything. I'm like, oh, buddy. let me tell you, that army of the damned is suddenly 13 untapped zombies.
Well, let me give you my secret tech for untapping zombies. This card is bonkers. And I feel like I don't really see it very often, so potentially I will a little bit more after this. So, from Scourge... It's an enchantment called Faces of the Past. So this is 2 colorless and a blue for an enchantment. It doesn't have the word zombie anywhere on it, but it says whenever a creature is put into a graveyard from play, tap or untap all creatures that share a creature type with it. So if you're a dedicated zombie deck, if all your creatures are zombies, every single time one of your zombies dies, and let's be real here, some of the time you're going to be sacrificing zombies, you get to untap your entire team. Equally, if you kill one of your opponent's creatures and they're a creature-themed deck, you can tap their entire team, which comes up from time to time also. And there are some wild combos you can do with this. You can treat it as a utility card, and it's all right as a utility card, but it's wild in combos. We will get back to Face of the Past combos in a little bit, but I'm wary that I've not told you my favourite way of getting lots of zombies in play. So, my favourite way of getting lots of zombies in play is with mass reanimation effects, of which there are loads. You can get lots of zombies into your graveyard comparatively easily. You can start self-milling with all sorts of bits and pieces. But you also are in the right colours to be able to get, depending on how much mana you want to spend, either all the creatures in your graveyard back out, or potentially all the creatures in everyone's graveyard back out. So, for example, I think the archetypal one of this is Zombie Apocalypse. 3 black, return all zombie creature cards from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped, then destroy all humans. I mean, what a story this one's telling just from the rules text. But yeah, there are a variety of different options on this. I rather like Patriarch's Bidding. 3 colorless, black. Each player chooses a creature type, then return all cards of any of those types from players' graveyards to the battlefield. You should have lots of zombies in your graveyard that all have lots of lovely coming into play triggers. And potentially, if you're running with a Dretch and you're eating other people's graveyards, they might not have nearly as much. So you get to just make a huge army essentially from nowhere, recover from that Wrath of God, and make people really pay. This is not, to my mind, a full combo, though you can certainly get there. If you get enough triggered abilities on things coming to play at the same time, it could feel like a combo. But if you're just saying, essentially, largely straightforwardly, you want to beat people up with zombies, these are the cards that really start to push the tempo a little bit, so that you don't just have to wait around on, all right, well, I've played one zombie on turn 1, one's on 2, maybe 2 on turn 3, and like trying to build up a board the old-fashioned way. You have a few other options, I guess.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, like, Reanimator is, like, obviously one of the other core elements of Black, and Zombie Reanimation is one of those things where, like, I didn't focus my deck on it as much because I was more aiming for the token style, but if you've got a lot of self-mill plan going on, reanimating your, like, getting your graveyard back into play is just such a fundamental Magic idea that just works so well with the zombie deck. It's so flavorful.
Yeah, and there's a few different speeds of it, I say. So at one end of the spectrum, you go, we've got our zombie apocalypses where we're bringing everything back. Then we've got Animate Dead style spells, where you're reanimating a specific card. And on occasion, these are built onto zombies. So, for example, Gravespawn Sovereign, you can tap 5 zombies to put a creature card from any graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. So, relatively straightforwardly, you can start nicking creatures from opposing graveyards. You can start making creatures come back from your graveyard. And then also you have lots of Raise Dead effects, so cards that let you get a creature from your graveyard back to your hand.
Yes.
And at that point, you can recast it, get those lovely triggers on casting, get those triggers on resolving. And a lot of those effects are given out very, very cheaply to zombie decks. So a card that I wouldn't leave home without, again, for zombies, almost regardless of the strategy that you're looking to play, is, let me make sure I get my names right, Unholy Grotto. A land, you can tap it for 1 mana, or you can pay a black and tap it to put a zombie from your graveyard on top of your library. So the best time to do this is typically in your upkeep or at the end of the person before you's turn, so that you get to redraw the perfect zombie for you. You can occasionally do some sneaky things of doing it other times, but fundamentally, this is your get out of jail free card for treating your graveyard as a resource. Occasionally, it means that when someone tries to mill you out, they actually just put 1 card back in your deck, and you don't ever get milled out, which is just a freebie. But yeah, this Oversold Cemetery, assorted creatures that let you do it, Volrath Stronghold if you're flush or have been playing for a long time. There's lots of ways of repeatedly getting creatures back out of your graveyard and into your hand. That again means that it's like drawing a card. Arguably, it's better than drawing a card if there's good creatures in your graveyard, a little bit worse if there's not. But it's certainly card advantage of some stripe, albeit fairly slow.
There's a card from like Stronghold or something, which was either from Tempest or Stronghold. That was you could pay 1 black mana, discard a card to get a creature from your graveyard back to your hand.
Yes. Tortured Existence?
Tortured Existence.
Yes.
That's another way for, like, it's not quite straight reanimation, but it does help you get your utility stuff back after you've pitched it. And it's pretty innocuous, and people tend to, like, ignore it.
Yeah, and there's some nice things that you can do as well. So something like Twisted Abomination is a 5/3 zombie that has swamp cycling. So you can pay 2 colorless and discard it to search your library for a swamp. Now, that's not necessarily as efficient as the new Lord of the Rings swamp cycler, but this one's a zombie, which both means it'll trigger your various zombie things, and you can get it back with Unholy Grotto every turn if you need to. Like, if you know that you just desperately need to hit your land drops, it's not exciting, but it works. You can be running Witch's Cottage, again, a land that just when it comes into play, assuming that you've got a bunch of swamps, which typically you will have, you get to put a creature back on top of your deck from your graveyard. Like, there's loads and loads of this in there. And
I feel remiss to not mention Liliana the Last Hope, who is maybe the best zombie planeswalker ever made. Because, or Liliana Death's Majesty. Death's Majesty's -3 lets you take a creature card from your graveyard and put it back onto the table as a zombie. Liliana the Last Hope lets you mill the top 2 cards of your library into yards, and then return a creature from your graveyard to your hand, which is also a card advantage in 2 different ways. And like the Liliana's, like I know I don't really like Planeswalkers in EDH, but these guys are so thematically important for a zombie deck that it just really works.
Yeah, I kind of see them as being pseudo commanders of your commander deck, even if they happen to not be actually at the helm, in the throne, whatever you might call it. But there's also some specific zombies that have coming into play abilities that are so strong that even if it doesn't seem fast, it's very impactful if you can just say, I'm going to keep casting this and then letting it die and casting it until either you deal with it or you're dead. So
he also Grey Merchant of Asphodel.
Yes, is a zombie. Doesn't need to be a zombie, is a zombie. And
as long as it is, I'm going to be recycling that guy as much as I can.
Yeah, so that's 3 black for a 2/4. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent loses life equal to your devotion to black, so your number of black mana pips in mana costs of permanents you control. And then you gain life equal to the total life lost this way. So if your devotion is 4, 3 opponents, they collectively each lose 4 and you gain 12. And life gain, there's not tons of it specifically for zombies. This is the gold standard of life gain for you, though. It will, if you said, all right, my game plan is just I'm going to cast Grey Merchant of Asphodel every turn for the rest of the game, that will already be a gut check for a lot of decks. They go, well, it might not kill me super fast, but how am I going to kill you while you're gaining all of this life? And in the late game, it can be a lot of life that it represents.
It's so stupid. And especially since a lot of these black cards, a lot of these zombie cards have double pip, triple pip, like mana investment. Like if you got a
good old Withered Wretch, black.
Yeah, exactly. Like Geralt's Messenger is 3 black mana. Like these things all just add up incidentally and so large. And it's so stupid.
It's
that card's broken, and I love it.
So we know that we can get things back. We know that we can be aggressive and go wide and essentially say that we're either going to win with damage by attacking or through, let's call it, accumulation of synergy. It's a lot of long words to essentially say cards working really well together. But I wouldn't consider that to be like a combo deck. That to me is more just, doesn't really matter what order you draw your cards in. They're all friends and they'll all do nice things when they get together. There are a lot of combos. And we're going to start talking about them. I've decided.
45 minutes into the show, we're going to start
45 minutes into the show. We might have to do a speed round on combos. So.
No, it's fine. Dude, I don't have an upper bound on this. I don't know if you do, but let's talk until we run out of juice here.
So, do you want to go infinite, deterministic? Just like,
let's start
where do you want to start?
Let's start small. Start from the deterministic small ones, and then we'll go to Crazy Town.
All right. So, in terms of smaller combos, so this doesn't win the game, but it's very powerful. Death Baron is one of the various zombie lords out there. 1 black for a 2/2. Skeletons and zombies you control get +1/+1 and death touch. Technically, there are other pieces to this A+B combo that you could choose. Essentially, what you want is death touch. So you could get this from a Wand of Orcus, you could get this from a Basilisk Collar, all sorts of other bits and pieces. But Death Baron is the most flavorful version, so that's what we've gone with. And then Deathbringer Thoktar. A zombie beast. He costs 6 mana, so he's a little bit expensive. He's 4 black and a red. So we've got a red zombie on board now, just for a little bit of a change of pace. Whenever another creature dies, you get to put a +1/+1 counter onto Deathbringer Thoktar. And then you can remove a +1/+1 counter from Deathbringer Thoktar to deal 1 damage to target creature or player. This is not going to immediately win you the game, but while these 2 creatures are in play, as soon as you've managed to get the first counter onto Deathbringer Thoktar by anything dying, now you can spend a +1/+1 counter to shoot something which will die due to the Deathbringer Thoktar having death touch, which means the Deathbringer Thoktar will get a new counter. You now have a machine gun to kill all of your opponent's creatures all the time. As I say, it's not going to win you the game.
No, but it's going to annoy.
But it's certainly going to make it a lot easier.
That's actually that's pretty clever.
It's a little bit cracked. Deathbringer Thoktar, because he's red. You don't see him show up in quite as many zombie decks because you don't see as many red zombie decks. But there are some really cool red zombies. Anathemancer, a very cool red zombie when it comes into play. Each opponent or target opponent? Opponents lose life equal to the number of non-basics they have. You get some direct damage in red. And red will be the color that you'll add to your zombie decks if you really want to play up sacrificing things for value, because that's something that red does very, very well. You know, as soon as you add a Dedapult or any number of different ways of sacrificing creatures for damage, you get to do very silly things with zombies.
Anathemancer is actually kind of rad, especially in a world where everybody's playing a million non-basics.
Yes, I have long been a proponent of both Anathemancer and Price of Progress as being surprising ways of ending games faster than people expect them to be ended.
What the hell is Dedapult? 2 in a red enchantment, red sack a zombie. Dedapult does 2 damage to target creature or player, or well, I guess now any target.
Yes.
What the
hell? Arguably not even the best way of sacrificing your zombies to do damage, but it's so on point in terms of flavor that it's hard to not at least mention it. Very, very cool, weird card.
I've never heard of this card before.
Well, there we go. Mission accomplished. Let's see, non-crazy. My actual favorite zombie, full stop, because it ties into a bunch of things that I enjoy, is Undead Alchemist. So Undead Alchemist is 3 and a blue. We're going a little bit off color again, for a 4/2 zombie that says, if a zombie you control would deal combat damage to a player, instead that player puts that many cards from the top of their library into their graveyard. That's any zombie, not just Undead Alchemist. So you suddenly go from, you have an entirely new win condition now. You're now a mill deck. Even if for the last 15 turns you've been a beatdown deck, now you're a mill deck. But also, whenever a creature card is put into an opponent's graveyard from their library, so whenever a creature gets milled for your opponents, exile that card, and you get a 2/2 zombie token untapped. This is the real juice on Undead Alchemist, is that if you have ways of milling people, and if you like milling people, Undead Alchemist can potentially create an army from nowhere. And
it is ridiculous. This card was in the Wilhelt precon that came out with Midnight Commander, and I took it out. I took it out of my Grimgrin deck because the mill plan was too far off from what my iteration of that deck wanted to do. But in the Wilhelt deck, when you're just swinging with like 4 or 5 zombies and suddenly just milling huge chunks of their library and just getting like a ton of zombies out of it, it gets disgusting.
Well, here's the real juice, because you don't need to be attacking. There are 3 cards, all of which I think
because they're separate clauses.
2 different clauses. So, Altar of the Brood says, it's a 1-mana artifact. Whenever a permanent enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent gets milled for 1. Now, this is not deterministic, but it's quite powerful. Imagine you have 3 opponents. You have an Altar of the Brood in play, and you cast Undead Alchemist. 1 permanent has come into play for you. Each of your opponents mills 1. If any of them mills a creature, that creature gets exiled, and you get a zombie, which triggers your Altar of the Brood, and everyone mills 1. And then if any of them, we can put this bit of the tape on a loop here, but essentially, until someone doesn't mill a creature, you just keep milling and making more zombies, which is already bonkers. But wait, there's more. Altar of Dementia is, to my mind, one of the most glorious and or terrifying cards in Commander. A 2-mana artifact that lets you sacrifice a creature to mill target player, in this instance, equal to that creature's power. Now, again, if you've got an Undead Alchemist in play, you sacrifice some zombie, not the Undead Alchemist, to mill someone for an amount. Every creature that you hit gets exiled, and you get a 2/2 zombie that you can then sacrifice to mill that player for 2. And you can, again, non-deterministically deck people from almost
Hogak
any
Summer
amount.
all over again.
Yes.
Hogak, also a zombie.
Yep. They just love tacking the creature type zombie onto otherwise already powerful creatures. There is a third, and I think this is probably the most benign of the 3 terrifying milling artifacts that go nicely with Undead Alchemist. Embalmer's Tools. This is one you don't see quite as often because it is very clearly not as powerful. 2 mana artifact. Activated abilities of creature cards in your graveyard cost 1 less to activate. That, honestly, there's not loads. That's kind of a red herring. But you can tap an untapped zombie you control to mill target player for 1. Now,
wait, just tap.
Just tap an untapped zombie. So there's no summoning sickness to worry about here. You just get to go, I've got a mini Phoenix that's just a cool artifact.
I'm imagining the weird scenario. You tap down all your things, mill them, and then you pitch a zombie to, I don't know, any of your altars, and Faces of the Dead untaps all your zombies so you can start milling them again. Faces of the Past starts untapping all your zombies, so you can mill them again, and then you're like, the creatures go to their graveyard, so you get more zombies that you can tap then to mill and then to pitch and then to get the untap. Oh,
yes.
That's
Face
like
of the Past lets you set up
there.
some crazy combos. So that is one of them. Absolutely. There's a few other good tapper abilities in zombies that are worth mentioning. So we briefly spoke about Crypt Breaker. You can tap 3 untapped zombies to draw a card and lose a life. If you've got a Faces of the Past, you can potentially be wildly tapping and untapping. We mentioned briefly the where am I looking on my little list here? Our chap that lets us tap 5 zombies to return a creature from a graveyard to play. Gravespawn Sovereign, yes. So let's imagine we've got a sacrifice outlet. Now we don't necessarily need to have a Gravecrawler to go infinite. We can tap 5 zombies to return any zombie we want, or any creature. Actually, no, sorry, any zombie in this instance that we want. That zombie comes into play. We then sacrifice that zombie, which untaps our 5 zombies. We can tap those 5 zombies to bring that creature back, and we've got a loop. We can potentially, if that creature was, I don't know, Grey Merchant of Asphodel, do infinite damage. We can potentially trigger lots of other bits and pieces. Face of the Past lets us do some really rad stuff. Other things that we can do with Faces of the Past. This is one I'm definitely going to have to check the name of because it's comparatively new, which means I've not played it quite as much. Where are we looking here? For 1 and a black, I can tell you all of the text on it before I even find the name of it because it's that great. For 1 and a black, we get a 1/3. Let me just scroll through my little... I say little, it's a gigantic list of cool zombies that we're going to talk about today. Siege Zombie. For 1 and a black, we get a 2/2 that we can tap 3 untapped creatures. So they don't have to be zombies in this case, but let's face it, they will be. To make each opponent lose a life. So if we want to go more direct and don't want to mill everyone out for some reason, we can just get our tippity tap engine going to murder everyone. Worth noting when we're talking about the mill effects going on, obviously we can mill our opponents out to kill them. That's a very fair and honest way of winning a game of Magic. We can also mill ourselves in order to set up a bigger Patriarch's Bidding, a bigger Whiter Precinct 6, to effectively pseudo-tutor for the cards that we need because we've got ways of getting them back for the graveyard. Like, mill effects work spectacularly well for zombies decks as enablers before they become win conditions later. You can kind of pick your poison a little bit for which way around you want to use your mill effects because they just grease the wheels for all sorts of things that are going on.
Okay, so let's move into more crazy combos.
More crazy combos. So, Rooftop Storm is almost a freebie.
Yeah, we haven't mentioned Rooftop Storm at all. Let me read that because it's like literally my favorite zombie card. 5 and a blue enchantment card, which says you may pay 0 instead of the mana cost for zombie creature spells that you cast. It costs 6. All of your zombies are now free.
Yeah, this is one of those cards that if someone doesn't know it exists, when they first see it, it feels like it shouldn't exist. Because, yeah, you just get to say, I have Omniscience in play, but I have a very specific set of priorities. And those priorities are entirely casting zombies. Because, yeah, all of your zombies are free. Now, everything that we spoke about for the slow effects that say I'm going to return a creature from my graveyard to my hand, they now say return a creature from my graveyard to the battlefield, effectively. You can set up lots of weird loops with getting something back from the graveyard and then playing it for free. One fairly straightforward loop, if we're looking for something a little bit different, Gravedigger is a 3 colorless and a black for a 2/2 zombie that says when it comes into play, return target creature from your graveyard to your hand. There is Grave Sifter, is the changeling version of Gravedigger, exactly the same, fundamentally the same text, but rather than the creature type being zombie, the creature type is it's a shapeshifter with changeling, which means it's also a zombie in addition to being every other creature type. And you get to go, okay, cool. Now I have a loop that if I've got a sacrifice outlet, I can use one to fetch the other, loop them around and get all of my lovely triggers for something dying or whatever my sacrifice outlet might be. So we spoke very, very briefly at the top of the show about Phyrexian Altar, sacrificing a creature for a single black mana. In this instance, it would likely be. You get to make infinite mana. If you've got an Ashnod's Altar, then rather than making a single black, you're making 2 colorless when you're sacrificing things. But Rooftop Storm, I will admit, I don't really play it because I feel like to me, it's in my little too easy category. And there's a bunch of cards in the too easy category, one of which I'm going to mention briefly because it does so many things with so many zombies, which is Intruder Alarm. Everyone knows it goes completely loopy with a ham sandwich.
Intruder Alarm goes combos with a ham sandwich, man. That's
But it does an awful lot specifically with zombies as well, because you have so many tap effects. Like, you can hijack people with Intruder Alarm. Faces of the Past is, I think, the slightly classier version of Intruder Alarm. Worth noting as well, I mentioned Grave Sifter briefly. Because Grave Sifter is every creature type, including zombie, it means that if you sacrifice a Grave Sifter, you can just say you're going to tap all creatures. Because every creature has a creature type. It is all creature types. So you can do some weird little synergy tricks with Faces of the Past, even if you're not doing gigantic, crazy combos. Another great combo zombie, Mikaeus the Unhallowed. He's a naughty boy.
Mike.
3 black for a 5/5 with Intimidate. Whenever a human deals damage to you, destroy it. Other non-human creatures you control get +1/+1 and have Undying. Now, Undying is one of those sneaky little abilities that can get very out of hand if you've got the right cards to go with it. So Undying means that a creature, when it dies, comes back with a +1/+1 counter. But if a creature with a +1/+1 counter on it dies, it can't undie again, if you see what I mean.
Sure.
Now, on the face of things, you go, well, how am I going to get rid of those +1/+1 counters? That sounds impossibly tough. Why would you put yourself through such a horrible, horrible situation? There are various things that work very nicely with it. So any creature with Persist and Undying are kind of the flip side of each other. So a Persist creature, when it dies, comes back with a -1/-1 counter. You can start doing weird loops. Deathbringer Thoktar can spend those +1/+1 counters that are on it to kill things. There's more ways than you might think to go a little bit loopy with Mikaeus the Unhallowed, and his fail case is all of your creatures, the first time they die, are going to come back. And that's already, like, you've got your value, and then things get silly. Yeah, there's almost everywhere you turn, you can either get value or you can start looking at combos for zombies. And to my mind, one of the strengths of the wider archetype zombies before you start looking at being very specific in what you're trying to do is that your opponent doesn't know which flavor you are. Like, you can go, like, if I show up to a table and I say, I really like zombies, I'm playing a zombie deck. Yes, people will go, congratulations, you cast a Gravecrawler. They don't know at that point whether or not I'm going to try and mill them, if I'm going to try and attack for lots, if I'm going to go infinite with a whole variety of different combos, if I'm going to try and really control the board, because we have got control combos as well. If you're looking at a way of losing friends and influencing people, Gravecrawler is very, very effective with things like contamination. In the interests of completeness, I did have to say it, that, yeah, you can... Contamination, an enchantment from Urza's Saga that lets you... It has an upkeep cost of sacrificing a creature every turn.
Contamination is 2 and a black. During your upkeep, sack a creature or sack contamination. Whenever a land is tapped for mana, it produces black instead.
Yeah, so
it's normal type and amount. So that Ancient Tomb is tapping for a black. Still do damage to you.
Yeah, it's rough. It's like arguably even more devastating than a Blood Moon, because this doesn't care about whether or not that land is a basic or not.
No, it's just it's a swamp.
Well, it's absolutely horrible.
It's such a messed up card, man.
It's, we're both on the rules on the advisory group for rules on Commander, and I feel like Contamination is exactly the kind of card that if someone plays it against you, you should probably have a conversation about whether or not you want to play against it again. Like, if it was a card that got printed today, brand new, and all of a sudden was showing up a lot, I think it's the sort of card that we would have conversations about banning.
I think the fact that it hasn't been reprinted and it just kind of is a card that exists and it shows up at like higher tables or whatever. But God, that card, I mean, I guess it would reprint in the list, but I think most people look at that and they're like, I want to play Commander with my friends again.
Yeah, I don't recommend it, but you can do it. And there are various other, like, weirdly, even just within zombies, Helldozer is a land destruction zombie.
Yeah,
like,
it is.
You can do almost everything with zombies if you really want to. It's just a matter of deciding what you want to do. And for me, that's part of the joy of them. But also, they have a dark side. They are the baddies. There's some cool, very specific kind of like archetypes, even within what you can do with zombies. So some of these, something like Navineral, he is himself a zombie. Sorry, he's a lich that makes zombies. Let me just get his wording up real quick because he's not on my page just yet.
Nev. He had a disc, it was cool, and then they made him into a creature, and now it's like, why did you do
as
that?
A creature, he does do some cool things. So, given that he's a zombie, so this is Navineral Urborg Tyrant. 3 white, blue, and a black for a 3/6 zombie wizard. He's got everyone's favorite ability, Hexproof, from artifacts, creatures, and enchantments. So he loses to spells pretty thoroughly, but when he's on the battlefield, he's tricky to get off with activated abilities. When he enters the battlefield, you create a tapped 2/2 zombie for each token for each creature that died this turn. And then when he dies, you can pay 1 to destroy all artifacts, creatures, and enchantments. So he is, to my mind, a great control zombie.
Yes.
But he also has some cool combos. So my personal favorite is essentially to go to play Navineral Scam. So if any of you are familiar with Grief, who briefly comes onto the battlefield, dies to his evoke ability, and then gets brought back with one of an increasingly large number of spells that say for a single black mana,
it turns out that there are way more of those stupid cards than I thought there were.
There's so many.
And they all suck in limited, and you rarely ever see them, and now suddenly they're just
you've got to go back through your draft sideboards to build this deck. But if you do so, you'll get paid off. Because if you basically say, Navineral's in play, I'm going to sacrifice him to my Phyrexian Tower, a land that lets you sacrifice creatures that conveniently is not going to get blown up by Navineral. But you've also made sure that once he's wrathed the board, he's going to immediately come back into play and bring a lot of zombies with him. Now you've got a game plan on your hands. It's a very specific game plan, but it's one of those tricks that the first time you pull it off, it does feel pretty good. The second and third time, maybe slightly less so. He is a board wipe on a commander, which is not necessarily something that's everyone's speed.
And it gets a little expensive after a while because he does cost 6 to go.
Well, no, the whole point is that you're not casting him. You're using your scam to get him back every time.
For Christ's
you
sake.
let him go to the graveyard and then just come back onto the battlefield and immediately give you all of these zombies.
Oh, that is... I missed that part. I don't know why. We were literally just talking about this card, but now I'm just like groaning and staring at you. I just want you to know you're a bad person and I regret everything.
You do not know what you're signing up for when you asked me to tell you about all of the combos.
Oh my God. Okay.
We were having a lovely time. And then we started.
Actually, before we like kind of wrap this up, because we are going a bit, why don't you give me like the general archetypes? And I mean, we talked briefly about it, but we didn't really cover it. Like, if you were going to make zombies of Black X, what kind of decks would you end up making?
It's always going to be inevitability.
Right.
And then, like, for me, I would pick something that would be a fairly middle-of-the-roady general that's not going to be sticking its head too far off the parapet. So maybe like a Geezer and Giralf that just lets me cast lots of things a lot of the time. I think that you're always going to have the ability to go wide with creatures. And then you probably pick some number of mill or combo or maybe like specific sort of Staxy board control.
Yeah, I want to focus in on that for a second because that does remind me of a question that I had for you. That's a general deck builder question, which is when you've got an archetype like this, where it's got so many different, very clearly defined paths, it is very easy for your deck to become kind of directionless. And like you lose focus on like, oh, should I be milling? Should I be tokening? Should I be controlling? When you're building this deck and you're just grabbing your favorite zombies and stuff in the pile, how can you focus your ideas and make your deck not just end up an ambient pile of zombies?
Like the toaster phone effect. Like all of the individual bits seem good, but when you put them together, now you're not doing anything well. You're just doing lots of things.
The toaster phone.
I think that was Apple came up with that idea. Like, if you keep adding features,
it's a visceral idea. I understand.
So how do you avoid the toaster phone effect when building a zombie deck? It's a good question. I think that like it's worth figuring out how many cards you need to add in order to allow. Like, I'm definitely someone who will have more themes than most in my deck because I get bored. And this is not necessarily good deck building advice to do this. You're better off focusing on a few things that work for you. If you can make it so that you focus more on the general value addition, especially for zombies, because they have plenty of cards that are just kind of generically value, and then figure out the win conditions at the end. Like often we look at a lot of archetypes and go, this is my end goal. I just need to reverse engineer from that end goal everything I need. And with zombies, there's lots of things that are very specific, but there's actually lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots, which is what I love about them, that is more just generally value. And if you go, I'm largely value with a small amount of really hyper-specific cards, then it's hard to go too badly wrong. But if you go, in order to do so let's imagine that your theme was that you wanted to build zombie land matter, right? So this would be a slightly weird deck, but go with me on it. So you go, okay, zombie lands matter. And that means either I'm going to get lots of zombies in play, I get lots of lands in play and do like Field of the Dead tricks to make lots of zombies, which might be an interesting option. Or I'm going to blow up your lands, or probably a little bit of both. I'm going to achieve land superiority in my zombie deck. You go, okay, so maybe I'll put a Helldozer in, and maybe I'll have a Shivan Harvest, and maybe I'll do a Contamination Lock thing. And, you might go a little bit off-piste, and suddenly you start going, I need a Dwarven Blast Miner in here or something. And at some point you go, does this feel like a zombie deck anymore? Honestly, my recommendation is build the solid zombie deck first. So if we imagine that our platonic ideal original zombie deck is mono black zombies with like a lot of the cards that we've just said are generically good, that are not really combo pieces, they're just good zombies. Play it for a little bit and then go, where do I want to go? And you can take quite an iterative process on it and go, I'm going to add, I would say that in order to see whether or not an idea works, probably add 6 to 10 cards that are of a particular theme. So let's imagine that we wanted to be a zombie spells deck, like a spell slinger zombie deck, which you can do. It's not the most immediately obvious path, but you could be like, all right, I'm going to add, there's a 6 mana spell that makes a zombie for every spell in my graveyard. And there is some of these names escape me. I'm sorry, I'm riffing. There's a zombie, a blue zombie that says it's got exploit, and when it comes into play, you can sacrifice a creature to return a spell from your graveyard to your hand. And then you go, yeah, and then I'm going to have Songs of the Damned, and I'm going to be making lots of mana and casting spells in the graveyard and maybe storming. If you've not got at least 10 cards in there to begin with that do that, you're not going to get a sense of whether or not it even could really be a thing. So you have to hit a little bit of critical mass so that you can see whether or not that idea works at all. And then it's just a matter of, do you want to really laser beam in on it? And at that point, your deck might start to feel less like a zombie deck and more like a spells deck.
Right.
Or do you want to go, how much can I minimize that idea in my deck, but still have it feel like it achieves something? So like my blue-black deck that I've been playing since I wrote the article that got you started on Commander, it's always existed to some extent or another. And the game that I play with myself is how many different things can it do? So I love a really, really micro compact package that can just sort of gradually get supported by the other pieces. And because there's so many general value things in zombies, they have always been a kind of integral part of that shell. So I know that if I want a mill plan, that mill plan can be as small as Alter Dementia and Undead Alchemist. And it doesn't need any more cards to have the potential to be a mill deck. If I wanted to lean into it, then I could add some of the other cards that we've spoken about. I could start adding, Glimpse the Unthinkables if I wanted to. But I know that with just those 2 cards, if either one of them shows up in a game, then I might mill someone out.
Sure.
And that makes me happy. Or alternatively, I could go, if I wanted to get all Staxy, I could have a relatively small number of cards that work with mana denial, that work with keeping things sort of difficult for opponents to really find their feet, get their creatures in play, get things started. Smokestack works wonderfully with a Gravecrawler. You're sacrificing that same Gravecrawler every single turn. Meanwhile, everyone else is having to sacrifice real permanents. Like, there's a lot of weird options that you can go down once you start sort of piecing together what the pieces of the puzzle do with one another. But like, it might be that you go, your specific breed of mill deck is actually, you want to be a Mesmeric Orb deck, that you've got your Unholy Grotto anyway, which means you're never going to get decks, but everyone else is at some point. Like, there's tons of weird options, but like, you can be either, let's laser focus on 1 or 2, or if you're not going to laser focus, then if you can bring it down to being literally 1 or 2 cards give you an option of a strategy, then you're in black. If you want to go down that path, you can have your Demonic Tutor, you can have your Sidisi Undead Vizier, who is a zombie that you can sacrifice a creature to get a Demonic Tutor. That there's Diabolic Intent is a very flavorful, cheaper version of Demonic Tutor that works great in zombies because you don't really care about sacrificing a creature to search your deck for the right card. If you've got a few search effects, you can play in the space super duper easily and just go.
I feel like I need to share one of my favorite cards we haven't talked about, which is called Corpse Harvester from, I think it was like Legions. It's 3 black. for a 3/3 zombie wizard, and it says 1 and a black tap, sack a creature, search your library for a zombie and a swamp, reveal them and then put them into your hand, and then shuffle your library. One of the absolute best zombie tutors ever, because A, it sacks a creature, B, it gets you a zombie and a land. That is insane ramp, and it's repeatable ramp. It's stupid.
Yeah, and like, if you're looking to go really zombie themed as well, or if you're, to be honest, if you're looking to go really themed on any deck in Commander, and I think that having a theme is always worth trying for, have a look at what you can do for mana acceleration that feels appropriate to your deck. Obviously, if you're trying to win as fast as possible, then the most appropriate forms of mana acceleration might just be the ones that give you the most bang for your buck. But almost inevitably, there'll be a couple that are a little bit more specifically interesting for your deck. So if you're trying to beat down with zombies, then Heraldic Banner, if you choose black, it's a 3-mana artifact. When it comes to the battlefield, you choose a color. Creature of the chosen color you control get +1 power, and you can tap it to add 1 mana of the chosen color. So in a zombie deck, a Heraldic Banner is a lovely little accelerant that just sort of gradually gets you there. Or Crowded Crypt, another 3-mana mana rock. Whenever a creature you control dies, put a corpse counter on it. At some point, you can pay 4 black, sacrifice your Crowded Crypt to make a number of 2/2 black zombies with Decayed equal to the number of corpse counters on Crowded Crypt.
Yes.
There's so many zones that you can build your theme in without taking up very much space in your deck. Like, if you have Witch's Cottage be one of the swamps that's in your deck that just lets you get back a creature, and then you've got an Unholy Grotto that lets you get back a creature, and then you've got a Field of the Dead that you've put in because you know that you can just about support that with your mana base. You've now got 3 lands that support the theme of what you're doing that haven't really taken up any space in terms of what you choose to put in the deck, but you just get to add to the vibe. And like, the vibe check is a big deal for like the long-term enjoyment that you have with your deck. So I think it ends up being pretty important.
Yeah. Crowded Crypt is such a good suggestion. Like that Midnight Hunt precon was so good. And they just recently put out the starter decks. There's a $20 zombie deck with Gisa and Geralf that's, like, I was going to say, whoever built that deck obviously comes from your school of thought, because they reprinted Withered Wretch just for that deck. And I'm like, so glad they did that, because more people deserve to find that beautiful little card.
Yeah.
Before we tag out, though, I do want to mention a few cards that are some of my favorite pet cards for a zombie deck that we haven't really talked about yet. One thing is that in War of the Spark, there were all of these amass cards, these like black and blue kind of like zombie amass cards that came out, like Gleaming Overseer, that says, it's a 1 blue black 1/4 when it enters the battlefield, amass 1, which means you get a 1/1 zombie army. But the key is the second line there, which says zombie tokens you control have hexproof and menace. And then Eternal Skylord was like, zombie tokens you control have flying. And like, there's a whole number of these that were out in that era that were made for like to buff your amass dudes, that just make your whole army of tokens suddenly into gigantic flying horrifying monsters.
Yeah, arguably a lot more powerful with regular token generation than they are with amass, because with amass you're making one big army.
Yeah, you're making one big punk thing, but when you've got like, I don't know, Field of the Dead just pumping out zombies, you can just make them real big. And of course, like, Diregraph Captain, the classic lord that also nugs you for one. The thing is, zombies is such a fun deck to play just because there's so many directions, and every color you can do it. Like green, black, you can go into self-mill reanimation stuff with like Lautleth. What the hell is
Troll, yeah.
Yeah, Lautleth Troll, which lets you just like, it's a zombie troll, and it lets you discard cards and just get them back in. And blue-black has like a million different zombies you can do.
Black-white I actually like quite a lot.
Black-white has gotten really, really cool.
So black...
Yeah, go ahead.
You can build black-white aristocrats zombie edition, and like, as it turns out, a bunch of the cards that trigger off creatures dying or coming into play are zombies, and also, you can
Wayward
like
Servant,
essentially,
baby.
If you've got your mono black deck, you can go, if I want to be mill, I probably want to be a little bit more blue. If I want to be aristocrats, I want to be a little bit more white. If I want to be sacrifice, I want to be a little bit more red. If I want to be graveyard recursion, I want to be a little bit more green. You're still a black deck. You're still a zombie deck, but you're
flavored,
more specifically doing a thing.
Like, have you seen Ratadrabic that came out in Dominaria, whatever? The 2 white, black, 3/3 zombie wizard with ward and vigilance for some reason. Other zombies you control have vigilance, so already your whole white and black team is just nutty. But then, whenever another legendary creature you control dies, you create a copy of that creature, except it's not a legend, it's a black zombie. So it's like you can just start making a ton of weird zombie puppets of all your legendary friends, and it's really silly.
Yeah, and like I think that one of the things that I'm keen that people take away with, I mean, this applies to zombies, but I think it applies to lots of decks, to be honest, is that like we have only very lightly touched on the notion of which commander you're going to play.
Yeah.
Like zombies is a very deep pool of legends, so and some of them are value, some of them are more thematic centerpieces, some of them are very combo oriented. But fundamentally, like, the cards are there. The 99 is there, and then you can treat the your commander as being whatever you want it to be. So it can either be the centerpiece of your combo, or it can be the thing that throws people off the scent so they don't see your combo coming, or anything in between.
Yeah, at least half the decks, I mean, half the games I play with that deck, I don't even cast Grimgrin, just because, like, sometimes I want to play Super Voltron, and sometimes my deck is just doing all sorts of other things, and he's just happy to watch from the sideline. It's a very versatile deck.
If you're looking for, if the guys that are watching or listening are looking for a zombie list that has a lot going on, I did build a list that we can stick in the show notes that you guys can take a look at that embodies some of this idea. So it's a Nekusar deck. Nekusar is a zombie, so we're on brief. And I love the comedic potential of people assuming when you slap down Nekusar, they make an assumption in terms of power level, which is not wholly wrong. This is a pretty powerful deck. But they will also almost certainly go, well, you're going to cast a lot of Wheel of Fortune-esque effects, and that's what's going to kill me. And this deck, it does have, it does have Wheel of Fortune and Windfall and Dark Deal.
But then is such a dumb card.
Essentially, the rest of the deck is a zombie deck that just, I have loaded it high with a whole bunch of the combos that we talked about today, and a bunch of relatively safe
siege zombies
that can just hang out and do good things.
Plague Bearer. Plague Bearer.
That's another one that I should have mentioned as one of my all-time ride or dies. Plague Bearer is fantastic.
1 in a black, 1/1 zombie, XX in black, destroy target non-black creature with total casting cost equal to X. Repeatable removal is always insane.
And especially in the world of tokens that we find ourselves in.
Oh, yeah. Pay one black, kill your thing.
1 black to kill a token is a very good rate. Like, you do find yourself getting a little sad once people have black creatures that you need to kill, but it's just a freebie. Like, if it sits there being a 1/1 for 2 that has the best creature type in all the land, you're not super sad. And sometimes you'll draw it on turn 9, cast it, and immediately blow up 7 things. And what a life.
What the hell? Deadly Plot? What is this card? I've never seen this before. 3 in a black, destroy. You can choose one. Destroy target creature or planeswalker, or return a zombie from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. I need that card. What?
That's a jumpstart card. Like,
what the hell?
I've done my best with this deck to either make things very functional or very thematic, or ideally a bit of both. It has a full Field of the Dead land base. So it has a bunch of lands that are all different. I'm going to tweak this very slightly before we put it up just to make sure that I'm completely happy with the land base. It has variety of different combos. It's as yet untested. I've not specifically played this deck.
Putting Tower of the Magistrate in there is kind of... That's a little shady. That's a little off tempo for me, but...
if you've never pointed at someone that's holding a lot of swords and just told them to drop them, like, not live. It's not about protecting your zombies. It never has
been.
That
is friggin' stupid, and I hate it. Tower of the Magistrate's a utility land from, like, Mask's Block, which says... 1 in tap, target creature gains protection from artifacts until end of turn. Oh my god!
But it doesn't specify it has to be your creatures.
That is so stupid.
Like, It's one of those lands, like, I love in my mana bases having cards that 8 games in a row they're just tapping for mana, and then the 9th game they dominate.
That
and
is so stupid.
Tower of the Magistrate against the everyone's got the friend that sees how many different swords they can give their commander. And
I'm the friend.
none of the swords give you protection from lands.
Oh God. I hate everything.
This is a Waste Not combo deck as well, because Waste Not goes great with Wheels, which go great with
Waste Not is
Nexar.
such a fun card.
And yeah, Bone Miser is the zombie wizard equivalent of Waste Not, so you get to double up on that. Like, there's a lot of layers to this deck. This deck's an onion.
Yeah, man. A rotting onion that shambles at you in death. I wanted to mention one more card before we land this, and that is called Headless Rider. Have you seen this card from...
I have seen Headless Rider. I like Headless Rider quite a bit.
Yeah, from like Crimson Vow. It's 2 and a black for a 3/1 zombie, and it says whenever Headless Rider or another non-token zombie you control dies, make a 2/2 zombie token. So, yeah, start looping those Gravecrawlers and making more zombies.
Yeah, force multiplier for Gravecrawler zombies, Gravecrawler combos for sure. There's another combo that I didn't manage to fit in this deck or mention thus far, but I might as well mention just while we're being completist, which is Rotling Reanimator. So he says whenever he's a zombie cleric for 2 and a black, that says whenever his power and toughness doesn't matter. It says whenever a cleric that you control dies, make a 2/2 zombie token. So he does potentially make a lot of zombies. So Withered Wretch is a cleric. Various other zombies just happen to be clerics. But if you happen to use, and there's a couple of different blue cards that do it, but I'm going to say I think it's Artificial Evolution is one of them, to change the creature type wording on Rotling Reanimator to be whenever a zombie dies. Now, Rotling Reanimator reads, whenever a zombie you control dies, make a 2/2 zombie. And it doesn't have the non-token text that Headless Rider does. So you can just go, all right, well, I guess that I'm going to sacrifice this zombie to my Altar of Dementia and Milieu 2. Oh, a zombie's died, so I guess I'll make a zombie. Rinse, repeat. Job done.
Oh my God. That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. I'm now making notes and going to be slapping that into my deck.
I mean, it's also like Rotling Reanimator is fine anyway, and it's quite fun with zombies because zombie is there was the race class model, right? Where they went, we've got people's jobs and people's inherent race or like creature type. And zombie is a creature type. It sometimes gets a little bit messy because every now and again you get things like a zombie giant or a zombie, like it's like an addendum to creature type. There are no zombie humans in Magic because apparently it's a very weird thing, but it's true. But because zombie is its own sort of weird protected class of creature type, it means that you can also then do a bunch of other creature type stuff as well. So you can build a deck that uses the party mechanic where you go, I'm going to have a zombie wizard and a zombie warrior and a zombie rogue and a zombie cleric, and I'm going to make party happen.
That is
without even having to worry about using shapeshifters. You can use zombie wizards to create an entire zombie wizard sub-theme and start doing cool wizard things at the same time you're doing cool zombie things.
Jeez.
Like the extent to which, like, essentially what we're talking about here is 30 years of Wizard of the Coast, bless them, putting the word zombie on creatures as trinket text that has come home to roost. And now we get to do essentially whatever we want as long as we acknowledge the fact that it will have the word zombie somewhere involved and probably be a deck that has at least some swamps in it.
Like the Flood of Mars from the Doctor Who set that just came out, 2 blue for an alien zombie horror that, like, whenever it attacks, it can turn another creature into the Flood of Mars or a land into an island, and it has island walk, which is just like the weird, disgusting inevitability.
Yeah,
funny as hell.
There's tons and tons of like. Sadly, we have hit a point now where, for a lot of creature types, I think that a perfectly viable strategy to going about building a deck is to type that creature type into your search engine of choice, get a list of every single one of them, and just have a nice, pleasant evening reading. There's so many cards that have the zombie creature type or reference zombies.
You
that
could build
I can
like
tell you from experience, because I did
decks.
it in preparation for this podcast. I read every card with the word zombie on it again, just to make sure I hadn't missed anything too crazy. And I discovered that, firstly, yes, I had missed various cards that I just hadn't put into my decks yet. But also, you have to be a bit more specific when you start looking for zombies, because there's a lot of them. Some of them will just not be your flavor for that particular deck. And so, yeah, working out your sub-themes and your sub-searches to get to where you actually want to be ends up being pretty important.
You know, I think we're going to have to bring this shambler to a halt at this point, because otherwise we'll be here all day.
Can't stop the zombies. Have you learned nothing?
I mean, dude, inevitability, right? Like this show will just keep hobbling forward no matter how many limbs we take off. But the sun is in my eye, which is a good time for me to call this one a day. Thank you so much for joining me today, Tim. I know we could do this all day, and honestly,
every day.
Like we could go back and just like as many zombie decks, we could have that many zombie episodes. But yeah, I'm really glad you were able to join me. I love talking to you all the time. Your ideas on deck building are always just very inspiring to me.
Like it's all just the Marie Kondo school of deck building. Do the thing that you enjoy and do it more. And you know, if something's not working anymore, hug it and let it go. But do the bits that make you happy. And
then find a way to cut them down into the 60 or so cards you're allowed to have in your commander deck. But yeah, if folks wanted to find you, or I guess like you should finish writing your book so I can have you come back here to talk about your book.
It's on the list. It's a thing to do. I'm kept fairly busy the rest of the time because I own a game store and bar in London that keeps me pretty busy. But you guys are welcome to all visit. It's called Rule Zero. I'll let you guys figure out where the name came from. And yeah, it's a lot of fun, and it means that I get to do what I love every day, which is pretty special.
That's awesome. And as always, my friends, you can find me on Gearpuri Gears on Twitter, as long as Twitter's alive, and I guess you'll find me elsewhere when it isn't. Like, I mean, I'm on Mastodon and Blue Sky and everything. You can also find me at my podcast, Shivam Wheeler Love Magic, or my other podcast, Chronicles of Dragonlance. And you can find me on YouTube every Tuesday, and also on Cool Stuff Inc. every Tuesday. And we're still hashing out who's going to be doing the editor, so I will properly credit them once I figure that out. But thanks to EK for 100 episodes of helping me get here. I'm really grateful. And also, I should just shout out Jess from Inkling Customs, who did my logo, Jonathan, and my music, which was brought to you by, I don't know, some free internet website that I found music on. But I might need to change my intro theme pretty soon. But anyways, remember, my friends, it's not magic without the gathering, and we will see you next time.